Thank you, Harvey. I'm going to quote Harvey a little later from a book that he co-authored with another gentleman here tonight, 1998, about issues which never seem to go away with respect to the rights of students on campuses and the functioning of campuses and their interrelationship with the notion of freedom of speech in the first place. But I have to start by saying that really being here tonight and especially listening to the students, to Chris and Morgan and Merritt and Robert, really fills me with optimism about the ability of dealing with these issues. These are solvable problems, the problems that this organization addresses. Solvable in part, indeed in good part, because of the very existence of FIRE, its leadership by Greg, and the association with it of all of you. This is an organization which makes a real difference on the ground in the area in which it acts. That said, this remains, as all the speakers have said so far, as it has been for years, a perilous time with respect to free speech on campuses. It sometimes seems that students, too many of them anyway, seem to want to hear only views that they already hold, and that colleges and universities seem willing to pander to that desire and to provide only views that certain professors may have about those subjects. On bad days, it reminds me of an old New Yorker cartoon in which the Supreme Court is all sitting around, as they do, and one justice turns to another and says, "Do you ever have a day when everything seems unconstitutional?" I think this organization must have that day every day. It really does seem sometimes, Greg has spoken about this on a more concrete level, but just trying to approach it on as broad a level as I can, it really does seem sometimes that for every judicial decision, striking down a speech code in publicly funded universities, that another dozen are adopted. And that for every absurd, outrageous, and humiliating speech-destructive withdrawal of invitations already made to individuals to appear on campus, that yet another one occurs, sometimes more unbelievable, almost incomprehensible than the ones that have just happened. I want you to know that this was not the way it was when I was in college. We had, how shall I put it, a no-speech policy. We didn't have a First Amendment. I'm not going back to the 19th century, but I do want you to know that when I entered college, I was given an identification card with my picture on it. And I went to Cornell, and on the back of it, it said something to the effect that I was waiving any rights I might have had. I wouldn't say anything they didn't want me to, and that if I didn't keep the card with me at all times, I could be suspended. And I want you to know that all of us lived with that. And there's a lesson in that, which is that if you really live in a society, and I did in those days, where there was no free speech, you could get used to it. You could assume that is the way it is. That's the way it's always been on campuses and indeed out of campuses, but certainly new people, new young people arriving on a campus and being told, these are the rules. This is how you will live. My, quote, silent, unquote, generation accommodated, lived with, had very little, very, very little in the way of protests about anything, even about the fact that we couldn't have a protest without the okay of the people we might have protested. That's the way it was, and in that respect, at least, we've had enormous advances. The problem now, it seems to me, is not so much that university administrations start with the idea, as in my generation, that we must suppress all speech, but that we must suppress all problems, that we want to avoid pain, and speech is very often painful in the terms of what it is, the reactions to it, how people behave on the basis of it. And whether it is concerned by administrations about reactions of what is sometimes a tiny minority of students, sometimes real or potential donors, sometimes imagined critics within the university or out, it leads to repetitive acts of suppression of speech within and by our academic institutions, including our most legendary institutions. There are only two sorts of meaningful responses to that. One is litigation, and fire, and I will say only fire, would really address that, participate in it, make meaningful the threat and the reality of litigation with the great assistance of the Davis Wright firm previously mentioned. That way of dealing with unconstitutional speech codes, that almost final way, going to court, threatening to go to court, and then going to court if necessary, is something that simply did not occur before fire was around to do it. And only fire would do the detailed work of reading each speech code. I want you to know, I, in preparation for this, read one of them. The idea of reading over 300 speech codes, even I know some of them are similar to each other, is mind-boggling. But only if you do that can you issue a report which would say that 58% of public colleges and universities are right now acting unconstitutionally in limiting, sometimes discomforting, First Amendment protected speech on campus, and then follow it up, as Greg has said, by litigation where necessary. Of course, there's action short of litigation, and that is exposure, disclosure of the misconduct with the attendant public shame, and shame it is, that follows the exposure. I mean, what else can one say other than that shame was deserved and visited upon Brandeis for offering and then withdrawing an honorary degree to Ayaan Hirsi Aliyah for her criticism of Islam. For Smith College, for withdrawing an invitation to Christine Lagarde, the first woman to head the IMF to speak to the graduating class. To Rutgers for so embarrassing former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice that she declined to appear. And just a few weeks ago, that George Will would be effectively disinvited from speaking at Scripps College in California after controversy about an invitation to him. We who live in New York City, of course, view ourselves as immune from all that. And so I cite to you as Chief Judge Loretta Preska of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York did a few weeks ago in a recent address that in 2012, when the college Republicans at Fordham University invited Ann Coulter to speak on campus, quote, "The uproar caused the group unceremoniously to rescind the invitation," unquote. What's going on? It's hard to resist the conclusion, but too many of our college students and university administrators evidently needed high school civics courses, since they really seem to have no idea what the basic thrust of the First Amendment and free expression more broadly is about. And they're not alone. It stuns me on a continuing basis how many people I know, educated people, including scholars, seem to believe that the First Amendment should be interpreted as nothing but an extension and an embodiment of their generally liberal political views. But think about what the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights is supposed to be about. Just as Robert Jackson put it this way, he said, "The very purpose of a Bill of Rights is to foreclose public authorities from assuming a guardianship of the public mind through regulating the press, speech, and religion. In this field," he wrote, "every person must be his own watchman for truth, because the forefathers did not trust the government to separate the true and the false for us." That is not a uniquely liberal or conservative view. It is a freedom-protecting view, nothing more or less. And there are some hard issues that university administrators have to deal with. Not everything can be sort of treated with a level which I have done myself, because so many of the things that occur on campus are so absurd. But some of them are serious. Some years ago, I received a call from the Yale Law School where I went, asking me for my First Amendment views, I think more accurately to say First Amendment imprimatur, in the following situation. A white Yale Law female student had been raped by a black man in New Haven. Every black student at Yale Law School every male black student found under his door the next day a piece of paper saying, "Now you know why we call you," and what has become the N-word. And a number of them said they felt threatened by the fact that this had been put under their doors in their own rooms. The question I was asked is it appropriate? Is it First Amendment threatening for us to call the FBI and ask them to have a look to try to make a determination about who did this? And my view was that it was appropriate to do so. I thought at the time that there could be harder issues down the road, There were not. Yale had then, which I saw outside here, a big board on which people could write anything. And I was wondering then what the reaction would be around the law school if that was put there. And it was not. And I thought it was a hard issue. But most of what you deal with, indeed I would say all of what fire deals with, are not these close cases where there may be a situation of genuine threat or genuine risk of some sort, except wounded feelings. And one should really not have to say that of all places, campuses should be most protective of freedom of speech. One of the reasons I was expressing the optimism I did and mean earlier is just my thinking of the 4 people we heard and all the other people who are freer now to speak out, becoming parts of American society through the years to come, and caring about and not just remembering, but being prepared to protect First Amendment interests throughout the entirety of their life. Yet on campus, what do we see? We see situations in which New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly is booed off the stage at Brown, not permitted to give a speech there because some small group of students so disapproved of him, or that as Fire's findings reveal, the topics such as abortion and gay rights and the war on terror were, quote, the cause of many disinvitation incidents, that the amount of disinvitations has risen considerably in the last 15 years, and that Harvard, you've heard of Harvard, I'm sure, has the most disinvitation incidents. I don't often quote William F. Buckley, Jr., but it is hard not to recall his observation that I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in the Boston Telephone book than the faculty at Harvard. So what can one say about this other than to quote from the American Association of University Professors saying in the clearest language that on a campus that is free and open, no idea can be banned or forbidden, and that no viewpoint or message may be deemed so hateful or disturbing that it may not be expressed. Or to go way back in our history, Oliver Wendell Holmes in college in 1859, while a Harvard undergraduate and the student editor of the Harvard magazine wrote, "We must have every thought brought before us when we are young, and we may as well at once prepare for it." And yet, that is not the reality on campuses today. When Harvey and Alan Charles Kors in 1998 wrote their great, meaningful, and world-changing book, The Shadow University, that they said, quote, "Contrary to the expectations of most applicants, colleges and universities are not freer than society at large. Indeed, they are less free, and that diminution is continuing apace. In a nation whose future depends upon an education in freedom, colleges and universities are teaching the values of self-censorship and self-righteous abuse of power," unquote. That was 1998 when their book was published, and alas, it seems even more true today. Fire, from the day it was created, has understood this and sought to expose it and deal with it. We are in the midst of an epidemic, and fire is providing an antidote. And so from me, and I'm sure from you, thank you.